waiting, contemplating what's the best day. Watching that movie underneath the mullet.
And welcome to Lethal Mullet Podcast live here from Quinlan's Canterbury in the Gold Coast of Australia, here tonight to chat about a film which is beloved to many Australians, many people that love, of course, Christopher Lambert, Kirkwood Smith, and of course Vernon Wells from Mad Max. This is just a huge, great addition to sci-fi lore back in the early 90s, folks, here in Australia. Shot here on the Gold Coast at Movie World, which we'll go on very, very soon about. So, Happy New Year, folks. I hope you enjoyed the last live episode we did, which is, of course, covered Highlander, The Gathering, which is a great, obviously, start to a TV show, which we all know quite well, thanks to, of course, Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast on the FPN, hosted by, of course, Lee Fillingsness, and, of course, co-creator of the channel itself, Founder Podcast Network, the one, the only, Kevin, the Raider Nerd, Reitzel. Good morning over there in the US. Well, first of all, I hope you're enjoying your week out here in Australia. We are fortunately going into a lockdown again, yes, here in particularly in Queensland. The new strain of COVID has unfortunately reached our shores, and we are going into a very short lockdown. It is 3 days of lockdown, so unfortunately trying to keep everyone safe, and of course making sure that the virus itself doesn't spread too far as well, and contain it as fast as possible. I think we've learned from that earlier last year. The faster you contain it, the slower the spread, and obviously the safer it is for everybody. So out there, everybody, mask up and be safe out there too. So, well, tonight's episode is going to be covering a very fun film. Now, this is a film which, in particular here in Australia, we go past the set of every day. This is a film that was shot on the Warner Brothers lot here in the Gold Coast of Australia, in Helensville, and it is it's basically a movie studio that was put there to make obviously international productions through, of course, Warner Brothers themselves, and of course Village Roadshow, which is attached to that, mainly for distribution and stuff like that too, which we'll go into a little bit later. But it's also a great place because Movie World's next to it. Now, Movie World is a theatrical park, a little bit like Universal Studios and that sort of thing, where you can actually go around and take different rides and stuff like that. Experience parts of movies. There's backlot there as well. You can see from films like Bonnie and Clyde. There's Looney Tunes lot there. There's Batman. You can actually go past. I think it's the Gotham, not the cathedral, but the courthouse. That sort of fronts there. There's a little Batman section there. There's a main street there too that was used in The Phantom with, of course, Billy Zane. So it's all there as well. So it's again an interesting part of the touring area here at the Gold Coast for those that come to the Gold Coast to enjoy, particularly film lore and stuff like that too. One of the big productions, obviously, there too. Aquaman was done there recently. Sanctum with, of course, the one, the only James Cameron was done there a few years ago as well. So there's a lot of movies shot here. Obviously, Kong Skull Island was done there as well, and there's a lot of films. Ragnarok, the biggest of the Marvels, was shot there too. So I've been there a number of times myself and experienced not only the theatrical park itself, but also the studio, which they take you through the blue screen areas. They take you through, obviously, to the great Foley artists as well. You really get to experience what it is like to bring that sort of artistry to life. And one of those interesting ones was Lethal Weapon 2. Now, it's the scene where Leo Getz is in the hotel room, high up in the high-rise, and it's when Riggs and Murtaugh come in, and they've got the little shopping trolley, the little food trolley that comes in from room service, and obviously they try and kill Leo. And it's all about them trying to save Leo, but it's also all using that action scene. You get to see the Foley artists actually create the sound, and through objects, obviously, you wouldn't expect to be there, where it's the foot sounds, the feet hitting the ground, the hits, whether it's on a bag of meat or something like that. all those sorts of things that we come to know now, the different sounds. And a lot of it pioneered by, of course, Hong Kong cinema years ago with, the amount of different live hits, because a lot of their stuff was actually Foley done live when they were recording that sort of stuff too. So I think a lot of the people since then in Foley have really carried on with that too. But also there's a great scene from Superman. There was a scene from the first one, which we get to see someone take part in, and it's the ledge of the Daily Planet, actual building itself, where Lois is just about to fall off, and you get to experience that. Obviously, they put the mat around that because that was a time before CGI had hit really big too. So again, mat artists, good old Matt. He's a good bloke, isn't he? So we're going to that very, very soon more. But before we do, here's how you can catch this show and many others like it on the FPN. You can get on there on fpnet.podbean.com. Go and check out the show. You can catch it on all your latest podcatchers out there too. iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, obviously Google Play. You can catch me on social media at The Lethal Mullet on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. So, as we mentioned in the previous show, this show and, of course, Making Treks a Star Trek Fan podcast, the Mullet Guild, the June show, and, of course, a new one called Mando Mullet, which is going to be a Star Wars chat show that we're going to be doing, is all going to its own little domain, still attached to FPN, folks, too, so you'll be able to catch these shows still there, but we thought we'd pull it all together because it's all mullety. So you'll be able to enjoy those shows. And, of course, you'll also enjoy a multitude of different guests coming on there too. Kevin and Kyle will be on there from time to time, as per usual. And you can actually catch them next week also on the Phantom from Down Under. Part 2, they chat about Han Solo, the expanded universe. We talk about Thrawn, great character. The Thrawn Trilogy itself, the effect it had on Han Solo. We also chat about Shadows of the Empire, this great series. And Kevin brings up this great one about, of course, now you probably remember the other one, the Carillion Trilogy, which was 3 books that basically took, I think it was about 16, 17 years after the time of A New Hope, and it was about the children, Princess Leia and Han Solo, going to Carillion to see where basically their father came from, the family, all that sort of thing. And of course, we had a certain cousin of the character come back and give him a bit of a trouble over there too. Great series, and of course, just as good as the Brian Daly and of course AC Crispin novels too. They're all fantastic, and it's all celebrating probably the most sought after cool character in Star Wars, of course, being Han Solo. So go and check that out. That'll be out in about a fortnight. And it's 45 minutes of just pure Star Wars chat on there too. A little bit of Mandalorian as well. And a big shout out to the fellas over at Fan the Tracks, of course, the whole team, and of course the heads of the show, Brian Cameron, Matt Booker, and of course my dear pal and co-host of Making Treks a Star Trek Fan podcast, Mark Newbold. Top of the morning to you fellas. All right. So, a little bit of news too out here. I have a couple of books which we're going to get into on the first episode in a couple of weeks' time. Of course, and this is to do with Light of the Jedi. And I picked up a new version of the Last Command, the Thrawn book as well, which we'll go into in the Star Wars show. But in Mando Mullet, we're going to look at the Light of the Jedi, which is the High Republic, the first book, and it's the new area of the Star Wars eras, 200 years before everything went to pot with the Empire. Before Phantom Menace, with the start of course, of Palpatine's little rise. Palpatine begins. Imagine that was a Nolan film, folks. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? No, it wouldn't. But we'll be digging into that one. Obviously, joining me on those will be a lot of different guests, but also our regular co-host on there will be Lee Fillingsness, which would be great. It's going to be a great chat show, very relaxed one. It's just going to be 2 pals sitting down, having a cuppa, there's a coffee, and chilling, chatting Star Wars, which I think, a lot of the shows that are done out there too are, similar vein, but they're always going for facts and different things that, just really, they're entertaining, don't get me wrong, but I think we're going to go a little bit more relaxed than that. We're going to just go into our love of Star Wars and really get to the bottom of some of the great characters, settings, and of course Mandalorian is going to be a big part of it too. The sort of resurgence of that era of between Return of the Jedi and the new stories that are being told, of course, with the Disney era. So we'll get in that too. I will say too, folks, if you haven't checked out some of the great stuff that's been happening on the site itself too with FPN, we've got some great stuff that's happened over, obviously, the Christmas break. Some great shows coming from What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast, Blood of Kings, some great shows happening there right now as well. And also, you got to check out too some of the Couch Potato Theatres that are coming along, and of course Culture Clash, which also you can find on YouTube now too. So it's the YouTube channel. It's got a lot of different stuff, like obviously we've got with the End Zone on there too, talking about American football, which we call gridiron out here. I still don't know why we do that. It's American football, folks. The one with the shoulder pads and the helmets and, well, we don't do that out here in Australia, folks. We just get out there and play it. And yes, it's contact, and yes, you're going to get hurt. Cheers. But I will say this: I said we're learning a lot about the different plays and stuff like that in that series of shows, and I think the video show that Kevin and Kyle are doing is fantastic because there's a lot of audience participation and also learning. It is from us that aren't used to the culture out here in Australia of that football, so we're learning about it, and it is played here in Australia. We'll tell you that, folks. It is played, but it's doesn't have the offensive and defensive sides because there's not enough players. So they literally play both sides. So they're pretty knackered after they've done one of those shows, or in this case, played one of those games. So anyway, but enjoy. We've also got on that channel, Lethal Mullet Network or Radio. We're still trying to figure out what it's going to be called. You'll find out when we release that. But on that, we'll also be having Darth Elvis on, of course, fellow Fantha, coming on to do a monthly chat about music. And it's going to be music that relates to, obviously, movies and stuff like that, but also music just of the era of the 80s, which I think really enforced a lot of what we saw in terms of those great action scenes. You think of movies like Top Gun. What would it be without the soundtrack? The soundtrack is such an amazing experience. Purple Rain, Prince. We've got things like the Batman soundtrack even. These great soundtracks. Ones that Flash Gordon's another one. Obviously the Queen did. So there's so many different ones we're going to be looking at. What made them so good, and just the experiences of when you put those on, the feelings that you get of remembering that time. When those movies came out. So definitely worth spending some quality time each month. Of course, looking at that with Darth Elvis. It's going to be a lot of fun, and he's a great singer, folks. If you haven't heard his band, and obviously a couple of Fanthas involved in that too. So well worth checking out. All right, so let's get to it, folks. We're going to chat about this movie, Fortress. So before we dig into the actual facts on the movie, Fortress is a science fiction film. It was done in 1992 and shot here in Australia, just between the Gold Coast and Brisbane, partly on location, and then the rest was done near Movie at the obviously the studios there. And it's typical prison movie set in the future. There's a little bit of a Mad Max feel to part of it. It's a Christophe Lambert vehicle, so it's playing to his talents and his comedic chops to a certain extent, but it's also playing to the crowd of, I think, the Highlanders a little bit, it's particularly with his hair towards the end of the movie, which we'll get into as well. It's filmed by Stuart Gordon, and the movie is literally about a ex-military officer who's in disgrace. His character is, of course, called John Henry Brennick. It's a pretty standard fair action name, isn't it? Brennick. Almost sounds like Braddock. Of course, Braddock being, of course, a Chuck Norris character from Missing in Action. And his wife and he are trying to get across the border into Canada, outside of the US. And it's at a state where a lot of the fuels and a lot of the resources on the earth are being used up in this I suppose, Mad Max-like future. And one of those things is that they can't have more than one child. And she's pregnant. So moving into another country, they're getting across the border so that they can actually conceive the child and, of course, live a free life. So that's what happens, but part of what that is that they get caught across the border. And that's one of the sets that myself and, of course, Kevin and some friends of FPN went and saw in 2017, which we'll talk about the experience of here I know, Kevin, if you're watching right now, you'll know that was an amazing experience, and you got to see what an Australian meat pie was like. You know, he was like, "Hey man, is that a pie?" And yes, it is, Kevin. It was a great experience because the pie shop is one of the biggest in Australia of its type, and it's frequented by tradesmen, or what we call tradies out here. And the tradies go and line up in a huge drive-through to pick up these, and we'll talk about that experience very soon. But of course, he gets caught and put into a prison, this huge multi-level prison that's underground, and put to work for this corporation. And of course, leading the corporation in the prison is Kirkwood Smith from RoboCop. He plays a really, really tough prison warden, if you like, slash robot, slash, well, we'll get into what his character really is a little bit later. But again, playing on his previous, villainous roles. And he's very charismatic, very good in this too. So it's about that, and of course, camaraderie of these group of prisoners that Brennick meets, and we'll get into some great cult actors in this one too, particularly the great Jeffrey Toombs, Clifton Collins Jr., probably one of his first roles in this as well. Great actor, fantastic actor. You still see in Westworld now, and obviously Star Trek 2009, and of course you see in, his best one I personally think is, of course, his role in Boondock Saints 2. That was a great role. So we'll get into that. We'll also talk about some of the Australians that are involved in this as well. Because, again, it's an interesting thing. We've got a lot of locals that are involved in this, not just from a stunts perspective, but they're getting in people that are involved in sport and stuff like that here, and huge back then. And some of them even had mullets and taught me how to kick a football, believe it or not. One of them did, anyway. All right, so the film itself set in 2017, so it's actually not far from obviously where we are now, only a few years after when it was set. And the opening of this takes place in the real world in Beenleigh, which is basically an area between Brisbane and between Gold Coast, which is on the southeast coast of Queensland. So that's the side of Australia that's closest to Hawaii and closest to New Zealand, obviously, that side of the ocean. And it is a coastal area, and this is basically between what we call the Logan River. And the Logan River is got a small bridge that was basically a two-way, and that was where the main freeway was at the time, getting from one city to the other back in the 1980s and early 90s, before they split it in between 8 lanes, which they've got now. And of course, they shut this down for a couple of nights to do this. Basically, it's a scene where they're crossing the border, and Brennick and his wife are trying to get into Canada to get safe and get away from the authorities and live a peaceful life after facing some pretty hazardous stuff as a soldier and an officer for the military. And what we see is basically an overarching shot of the camera climbing up over the top of the bridge. Now, this is a bridge which has got just one flat level. It's pretty high, but it's one where it's so far off the water that they can get this really beautiful shot which goes right up to the guard tower, looking over one side. And so I believe from the Brisbane city side down towards Beenleigh was where it was set, as far as the shot, and it's looking over the bridge. There's lots of spotlights up there. Some very, I think, particularly with the design of the guards' outfits in this, they look like basically Air Force outfits or engineers' outfits with helmets, with the full face masks and stuff like that on to roll down, and some made-up blaster-like rifles in this at the start. They put a little prefab up where that little prefab was going to be where all the testing's done, where they go through, and basically it's customs going to Canada in that scene too. But back in 2017, so it's interesting that it's the same year that this is set. Kevin, I bet you didn't even know that. Kevin Reitzel, how amazing is that? 2017 is when the movie's set, and 2017 is when we went to the set. There you go. I didn't even know that myself, so that's pretty damn amazing that actually happened. Anyway, but in 2017, Kevin came out here with his fiancée, and we went to a number of the sites that films are taking place. Obviously, there's some pretty big ones that shot on the Gold Coast in the past, but this is out of all the ones that could be an interesting film, particularly in sci-fi, and particularly for somebody that's a bit of a Highlander fan, there can be only one set, and this was the set. So it's interesting. Again, when you see it in the daylight, it's a bright red bridge with steel girders and stuff like that. It's now just a walk-through bridge, so it's literally paved out with bitumen, and people just literally walk across both sides from one parkland and basically over to the residential side now. And it's next to and parallel with the new freeway, which is 4 lanes either way from Brisbane to, of course, the Gold Coast, where I live. So anyway, interesting was that they basically use those girders up the top and the top levels to put these spotlights, give it a real smoky atmosphere. It was very atmospheric at night time where they shot this. And we have a little bit of an action scene. Obviously, it's a scene where we got Brannick's wife trying to run away, played by, of course, Lauren Lachlan, and she's gets through the test, but runs off after they see that there's a flak jacket under her outfit. So one that she's trying to block basically the heat waves or whatever they're using to get past the test. What's interesting, though, is then at the same time as getting around the cars, and have a look at the cars, folks, because there's some great muscle cars from Australia in some of these scenes, as well as the American ones that are obviously front and center in this, to not give away the idea that it's in Australia, folks. But what's great about it is we've got him then chasing after her to try and get out of there past the authorities, and he's chased down by a pack of Rottweilers. And we have a scene where obviously he's trying to hold them at bay, and while his wife gets across the border, which he believes that she does. He's then taken prisoner and sentenced to the fortress. So that's the big opening. And so in 2017, we took Kevin, head of FPN, of course, co-creator alongside with Kyle Wagner of Fan Podcast Network. And he'd never been to a pie store here in Australia. Now, this just happened to be Yatala Pie, so you can look it up, folks. Yatala Pie Shop, which is the biggest one that I know of anyway in Queensland. It's huge. Next to, only across the freeway from our last remaining drive-in movie theatre as well. So it's the perfect place to get a feed before you go and watch movies on the big screen, because we know drive-ins are the safest place to see movies in the middle of COVID times. So interesting that we went there, and I think Kevin was expecting basically pizza, which I realise in the US, a piece of pie is basically a big wedge of pizza. But out here, it is a pastry around about yay big, about this high in diameter, and it's filled with beef, and then sealed on top. That's it. So it's not like your cherry pies and all that sort of stuff you get in the States. It's not a sweet thing. This is a pastry filled with beef. It can be filled with steak, can be filled with bacon and cheese, bacon and egg, all these different ones. Huge pastries. And it's the breakfast of champions out here in Australia. So you'll find Yatala Pies is such a huge shop. There's lines of about 80 people at times lining up for just a piece of pie. So Kevin, myself, Blair, and a friend Brad, and of course his partner Aaron, we all sat down to a lunch there, and he had his first pie. And again, it's a bit of Australian culture that you just have to experience if you come out here. So when Kyle Wagner finally gets out here from over there, you will be experiencing it too here in Australia. So after that, obviously Brannick is caught, taken interrogation, and obviously meets director Poe, which is, of course, played by Kirkwood Smith. Now, Kirkwood's one of my favourite actors. He's not only in that 70s show and so many other comedic roles, as well as tough guy roles, or just in great villain roles in general. Robocop, obviously, is the first time I probably saw him. After that, we had, of course, Star Trek roles. There's quite a few, actually, Star Trek roles. Everything from The Undiscovered Country onto Voyager, and I do believe it was a Deep Space Nine. I think he may have done a little bit of that as well. But he was also in the pilot episode of Michael Bihn's The Magnificent Seven, which I really enjoy that series. The 2 seasons that they did are quite amazing for a TV show. And again, it's sort of played on the theme of the first film as well. Great stuff. So Director Poe is oversees basically the prison itself and Z10, this computer that monitors everything. So basically, it's 1984. It's Big Brother looking over everything. And Zed basically has computer access, drones, everything over this multi-level prison. So watches everything that happens, and then deals out punishment. The punishment being intestinators. Now, here's an interesting concept for sci-fi. Intestinators are basically an implanted metal piece into your body. It's got a charge in it, and it reacts to when Z10 deals out punishment. So it gives you a shock, a pain, whatever it is, and it basically blows up your intestines to a certain extent. There's varying degrees of it. One setting can kill you, one can just stun you or just give you a certain amount of pain. So it's interesting in that way. We get to see, obviously, that played up, particularly in one of the first scenes where a prison just can't handle it and dies from it. So we got that. We also got the prison itself laid out with no real doors or gates and stuff like that. It's all by laser. And so if you try and walk out when the lasers or the main door is on, you'll blow up, basically. So there's all that. We've got a great array of fellow prisoners in this, and it follows the same sort of usual prison movie where new recruits come in, or in this case, new prisoners come in. They try to obviously not get them to be anywhere near the gangs and stuff like that at the same time, but of course, Director Poe is trying to cause as much damage as he can to Brannick by putting him with some of the tougher characters around there too. Straight away, he's also meeting some characters like Abraham, who's basically a model prisoner who works for Poe directly. He's basically his secretary, servant to him. And what Abraham's trying to follow up is that he's got a parole coming up. So he's trying to do everything right he can, but not knowing that, of course, Director Poe doesn't want him to go anywhere because everything's perfect with what Abraham just does everything to the letter. And of course, we also then have a bunch of different sort of prisoners along with that group, which we'll get into the cast of that very, very soon. Each one's got their own particular plight, and it's actually really well done. And there's a short time, and this is only a very short film. It's not one that gives it a lot of time for characters to develop, but in these scenes, I think you get enough, particularly with their fight against the Mentel Cybernetics Corporation. Obviously, through that, we get to see a number of little henchmen get knocked off as we go through it. We get to see how they get rid of the Intestinators, which is very, very fun scene. If you haven't seen the movie yet, I won't give that away. That's worth just watching for it too. But through this, we also see Director Poe has actually found Brannick's wife, and she's so further through her pregnancy, and he's basically trying to bring her around to love him. And one of the big twists of this film is that the babies that they are stealing, or the Mentel Corporation is stealing, they're turning into these part cyborg, almost immortal beings, which means they also lose the ability to create life. So a lot of that is he's like a child. He's this character that's almost trying to find love through the sort of things that he's doing, even to the point where he goes against Zed himself to a certain extent towards the end of the film. So it's interesting, but again, we have this great payoff at the end, which it really is that classic 80s and 90s throwaway thing of just a huge all-out brawl, but also all-out gunfight with these interesting sort of robot-like, Terminator-like machines with Gatling gun-like arms. It's an interesting firearm, which looks like a triangular pattern of 3 separate Gatling barrels. You put your arm inside it, and I'm guessing it was just a submachine gun of some type inside, and you fire that with a belt, which doesn't even look like it was linked to anything. So I'm wondering what this line of endless ammo was coming from at the end of maybe people that know firearms can tell us what this was. But I'm sure it's like old Painless in Predator, once that thing just went flying, you ran out of ammo pretty damn quickly. So I mean, that's pretty much where we are with this movie. It is an escape film. It's not quite Escape from Alcatraz or The Great Escape, but it plays to, particularly for an Australian film or one that was created here, obviously with international money and stuff like that behind it and creatives. Yeah, I think for what it was, it's quite a damn good film. Before we get into the cast, I'm going to give it its rating straight away for me. On a Hallenbach scale, folks, this is a 3.5 out of 5, without a doubt. I think you just need a little bit more in the way of development of Brennick himself. All right, so let's get into it. Christophe Lambert plays John Henry Brennick, and again, he's basically following on the suit of doing some obviously great roles in Highlander, Greystoke, obviously, as well. And I think Subway was it he did before that, over in France, I think. So again, playing to his strengths, he's got a real charismatic sort of performance in everything that he does. But I think in this in particular, he's playing to his comedic beats as well. And, you know, to a certain extent, there's quite a bit of Conor McLeod in this, the way he's playing it. You know, it's you still get those beats and you still get the laugh, you know. That's the Lambert that we know. You know, it's just really well done. And Lambert's likable. He's always been a likable actor, and I love what he does in this one in particular. Only because we see him in sites that I see every day. I pass that bridge every day before I go to work. So there you go. Fortress has got a special place in my heart. But at the same time too, it's hot on the heels of Fortress was around the time of Highlander 2, other films that they've done at the time. With Sicilian, I think he did, if I remember right too. So obviously, you know, it's at a time where they were gearing up towards the TV show, which we talked about last week, The Gathering. And yeah, I think he was just willing to try other stuff, and he's done a lot of different sci-fi over the time too. So quite likable. Lauren Lachlan plays Karen B. Brennick, obviously the wife, and she's quite good in this. You know, she does obviously have quite a lot more to do with Kirkwood Smith's character, obviously Director Poe. Not as much with Brennick himself, but I think because, you know, obviously we only see at the start and the end when they finally reunited and stuff like that. But we see it through dreams and stuff like that Brennick has when he's brainwashed. But it's quite good. I thought it was really good. We have, obviously, Kirkwood Smith. Need I say more, folks? We've already talked about him. Lincoln Kilpatrick as Abraham. He's fantastic. I think Lincoln in this is basically, you know, somebody who's played the game as far as he can. He knows that he's sort of trying to be the best inmate he can so he can get that parole and get the hell out. But he doesn't realise that he's, you know, as Karen Brennick says, you know, you realise you're not getting out of here. You know, everything is set the way it is because they want it. And again, you know, it's interesting that you could get to that point where he realises, right, I've got to help the Brennicks, I've got to get out of here, and this is my only ticket out, is to follow these guys. Particularly when Brennick's a former Special Forces soldier or whatever it is, you know, he's got the skills to get out. Jeffrey Coombs, fantastic actor. One of my faves, particularly from Star Trek. His work on Star Trek's brilliant. If we look at Star Trek in general, one of my favourite things that he has done is his work with Enterprise, where he played the Andorian captain, and he plays her so well. I mean, it was a role where it had to be played straight down the line, no humour, but the humour comes from that. And obviously he's done a lot more Star Trek than that as well. Other sci-fi as well. I think he was in the second Future Cop film as well, one of my favourites. Trances 2, that is, I think. But just really good character actor, one that's always been good. And particularly this one, he's playing D-Day, who's a computer geek, and obviously he's the one that figures out how to get rid of the Intestinators. But he's also somebody that garners respect through the film, through his deeds, particularly from Stiggs, which is Maddox's buddy, played by Tom Towles. He's really good. Tom I've seen in work like Firefly. He's on there when they have that bar scene at the start of one of the episodes, and it's about Unification Day. And he's the one next to Nathan Fillion going, righto, have a drink with me to Unification Day. So there's that, and he's also in what was the other film I saw him in? Miami Vice, which he was really good in too, and a small part in that. And that's of course the movie with Colin Farrell and Jamie Foxx. Maddox, though, his buddy, is played by Vernon Wells. All right, folks. Now, if you don't know who Vernon Wells is, you might remember him from a little movie where starring, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger back in '85. Directed by, of course, Mark Lester. This is, of course, the one, the only Commando. And he played, of course, Bennett. Let off some steam, Bennett. Hey, John! That wasn't a put-on Australian accent. He really is Australian. And, of course, he's also in Mad Max 2, better known in the US and abroad as the Road Warrior. And, of course, he played one of the bad guys in that. We also have Clifton Collins Jr. Playing Nino in this. And this must have been one of his earliest roles. Again, really, really good in this. He's always a fantastic actor. I think he steals a lot of the performances in even Eric Bannister to a certain degree in Star Trek. He was great in Tigerland. He's really good in Westworld as well. But always the best, I think, for his role in Boondock Saints 2. If you haven't seen those two films, and hopefully there's a third one coming too. We need 3. Which is, again, it's going to be a prison film too. By the way that last 5 minutes of the movie was set too. But yeah, Clifton, fantastic actor. Now the other one in a cameo with a mullet is an Australian rules footballer by the name of Warwick Capper. Now, Australian rules football is an interesting one, which is not like American football. It's nowhere near like rugby, which I follow. But this one is one where basically it's a high-scoring one by kicking the ball through 2 big posts. And it can be punted through the way by both teams, passed around, basically like boom, like this, on the back of the ball. And you can also catch it, which is called a mark. Everyone stops and then you get a free shot at the goal. That's it. That's what that game is. And those that follow it down to Victoria, good luck to you. Hi, Aaron. We play a different kind of football up here. And it's a bit more heavy on, a bit more contact. Rugby league for life, folks. Anyway, but yeah, look, the movie's great. Warwick Capper was in it for a few scenes, and he taught us in primary school how to kick a football. So there you go. Not the way I'll kick it though. I'll tell you that. So the movie is interesting. It came at a time, obviously, around when Alien 3 came out, another prison movie. We had Tango and Cash, another prison movie. We had Lock Up, another prison movie. And Death Warrant, Van Damme, another prison movie. So prison movies were the thing. Maybe it was just cheap to make them at the time. Who knows? It's interesting. But with the sci-fi atmosphere of this, maybe it's a step above that. I mean, we had Free Jack out as well, which was kind of a Mad Maxy sort of thing at the time as well. But, whether it worked or not, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, it was a bit of a VHS hit here in Australia in particular, quite popular with sci-fi fans. We all got into it. But I think the thing that keeps bringing me back is because it was a local production and I get to see stuff that I see every day in a different light from these great creatives behind, obviously, the film itself and behind bringing this vision of a scary future to the core. So, yeah, it's interesting. Interesting too, if you've seen it overseas. Now, I know it got a UK release. It got obviously Australian release out here in New Zealand as well. But I don't know how much of a release it got in the States. Kevin's got a copy of it, but he had to get it out here in Australia. So for you listeners out there in the US, have you seen this film? So comment below in the comment section here if you're listening on Facebook today or vice versa. And just let us know, where did you find the film? Did you see it in the cinemas? Did you see it on VHS or DVD? One thing I've never seen is a Blu-ray edition of this. So it'd be interesting to see if there's any Blu-ray versions of this. This one was out by, what do they call it? I think it's Reels Company or something like that. It's an Australian distributor out here. So I'm not sure exactly what company. I'll post that up a little bit later for those guys that are looking for a copy of the film itself too. I'm sure it's streaming somewhere. It's a popular film. People want to see it, so worth checking out. And we'll also look at other Christopher Lambert's films out there too. Now it says here too, it was put out on DVD in 2006 to 2017 by Sony Pictures Entertainment. So also Nameless Media, so maybe that's what this one is too. There is a Blu-ray and DVD and a steel book. So Brian Snook, if you're out there tonight, get your steel book, mate, because there's one here. But also too, it's interesting is this could have had merch. We could have had obviously the strike clones, and this could have been one that was done with the guns and stuff like that too. You could have had action figures of this. There's some great characters here. D-Day, obviously Maddox, and all, obviously too the outfits themselves. Like it really sets for something that could have been a bit more. Now there was an actual sequel to this, which was called Fortress 2 Re-Entry. It pretty much wasn't bad for what it was. It's directed by Jeff Murphy. That name might be one folks. Jeff Murphy, director. Who would he have been when it came to directing? That's right, because he worked as a second year on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So there you go. Interesting. But also, what's great about it is he also worked on Under Siege 2. So it's interesting. He's worked with, obviously, on Free Jack as well with Emilio Estevez and, of course, Mick Jagger. Yes, Mick Jagger, folks. Yes, if you haven't seen Mick Jagger's Ned Kelly film, it's an experience I think you got to do. You got to check that out. So well worth checking out. But yeah, it'd be interesting. Maybe if you guys want us to look at Fortress 2, we can look at that in another episode. It's an interesting movie in itself. Came out in 2000, roughly, here in Australia. There's a DVD of that. I do believe you can also get that in a Blu-ray. Christopher Lambert came back. Lauren Lachlan came back. But again, it's different. Sorry, no, she didn't. No, it was played by the wife was played with a different actor. So we'll get into that. That maybe if we look at that, that obviously came in March 3, 2000. So there you go. I think I've only seen it out on DVD, folks. So that's how far back that is. On a budget of only 11 million at the time. So it's still pretty big budget for a potentially a B grade at the time here too. Not shot in Australia. Shot somewhere else too. Anyway, we'll get that another one very, very soon on the show. Upcoming, we're going to be looking at Moon 44 in the next episode. Michael Paré, as I mentioned, a huge fan of. Great actor. And that movie Roland Emmerich did, obviously Germany, with a fairly minuscule budget, but we've got Brian Thompson in it, and obviously some actors who would go on to work with him in Universal Soldier and others, and of course behind the camera as well. Which we'll talk about in that episode too. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the episode, looking at, of course, Fortress. We'll look at Moon 44 in the next episode, and stay tuned for, of course, Mando Mullet. That's coming up very soon, the next week or two. And, of course, a new platform here. Still also find us here on FPN, folks. I'm Adam O'Brien, the Lethal Mullet. We'll catch you then, and enjoy your week, and stay safe, and stay cool.
The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is...
G'day, man. How you going? Follow the Lethal Mullet here on Fandom Podcast Network's master channel at fpnet.podbean.com, or subscribe on the Podbean app, where you can find all the shows. Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast. Culture Clash, a weekly look at pop culture. You look at Making Treks, a Star Trek fan podcast. You can also check out the Mullet Guild, a look at the Dune universe from me, the Lethal Mullet. You can also check out this show and all the others like What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast, Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast, and much, much more. All on FPN. You can follow on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and all podcatchers. Make sure you follow me, the Lethal Mullet, at The Lethal Mullet on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.